Welcome to Healing Generations, a podcast creating a dialogue uplifting the importance of healing, strengthening, and supporting our communities, and that addresses the disparities and inequities in communities of color. Healing Generations is brought to you by the Healing Generations Institute, a collaborative initiative of the National Compadres Network and the Brotherhood of Elders. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on our new releases.
Hello, welcome everyone. This is Tello with the Healing Generations Institute and the Healing Generations podcast, a collaboration of National Compadres Network and the Brotherhood of Elders. And we're here again. We thank you for joining us and for coming along with us as we, continue to lift up and lift forward the teachings and the medicine of our cultures, of our ancestors, of the many experiences that we had. And as a process to address the many wounds and systemic and generational trauma that we carry, but also the many issues that are going on today. And definitely today in present society, we see many things, people carrying many things. And so I'm really, really glad that you join us today. I want to begin just by inviting you to land here with us, to connect with us in a good way, have us take a deep breath and get into that breath. And with that breath, you recognize that breath is the breath of your ancestors. So we want to acknowledge people, all your ancestors, all the relatives that you have that have brought you to where you're at. And as we recognize those, we recognize the many journeys that they've had and also the teachings that they've given us, the values, the traditions, the ways that they've given us that in spite of us maybe not even knowing it cognitively have got us through and got us where we're at today. With that, we acknowledge the people of the land that you're on. I'm on the Tangva Gabrieleño land here in Los Angeles, and would acknowledge the people there, our relatives there, and make a pledge to them that we will continue their legacy as well of honoring the land and taking care of all the relatives that are around there. And when we do that, we honor the barrio, the community that we're in. Whatever community you live in and you live with, let's bring them to mind. With their blessings and with their struggles as well. And then we call to your own families, your blood-related families, love-related families, all that you call family. And finally, maybe it's just a little breath for you. That way, we thank you for being on this journey, for doing the work that you do, for doing your personal work, but also the work that you do with communities. We want to thank you for that. And this podcast is part of that. It's part of fulfilling my mother's wishes. She told us que estamos aquí para servir la gente. We're here to serve people, and she meant it literally too. We'd go over and have to serve people, but in a larger sense, she's kind of guided me on this process, and to help guide us today too, and share. I'm really just excited and overjoyed to have a compadre, a good friend, a colleague. We've known each other for many, many years in many different realms. But I know him as just a good hombre, an hombre noble, a good man, hard worker. He also, on the professional end, he's executive director of the Melissa Institute for Violence Prevention and Treatment, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to the study and prevention of violence through education, community service, research, support, and consultation. But Etiony has done so many more things, throughout his years, a prolific researcher, writer, speaker, advocate for health and healing and for the prevention and the intervention of families and people, and especially men who have that as a wound, the issue of violence. And his work is really, a legacy for all of us. And he continues to do that work. But I'm just excited to be here with him. And, Etiony, I'm just so glad, bienvenido. Gracias por aceptar invitación, and thank you for who you are and all you do. And I'm going to turn it over to you and allow you to welcome the folks that are listening.
Muchas gracias a ti. Thank you, Jerry. We've been in this together, I think, since 1995. I was looking back in preparation for the meeting. I was trying to see when we had those first meetings that led to the National Latino Alliance for the Elimination of Domestic Violence, when I was just a kid out of grad school. And yes, it's been that long, and it's interesting that you began the podcast with that reference to doing the work that you're doing to respect your mom's wishes that you serve and that continue to serve others, because that is something that I think we share. And I don't know that we had talked in depth about that in the past, but I mean, we know that my life and your life, we've been dedicated to serving others in any way that we can. And I was fortunate enough to learn early in my academic career that I was in a position of privilege from which I could serve differently to others, that I had a role to play at the table. And there were people like you and Ricardo Carrillo and others who were good mentors of mine in that process. And I thank you for that, for letting me know, like, listen, this is not academia. This is not, who's smarter, but you can help us and bring the dots together here in a way that others can't. And just figure it out, and we'll be here. So I owe you for that. Now, what you and others in the field did for me in the field of domestic violence, you rekindle a flame and a set of instructions that were given to me much earlier in my life. And I was thinking about we are all the products of our interactions, with those significant people in our lives, and that we grow to emulate and respect. And I was fortunate, really fortunate, to have a rich group of people in my life that taught me different things that I carry to this day. And my mom being kind of like just an extraordinary loving and grounded human being who her everyday lessons from care, love, compassion were amazing. I mean, she was a social worker by training. And I was the oldest boy in the house and the one that had a little more time to hang out with her. She would take me often with her to her outreach. We would call them outreach visits. She would go into the community.
And this was in Puerto Rico?
In Puerto Rico, exactly.
Sí,
in Puerto Rico.
Your familia viene de Puerto Rico, right? So that's a really important thing.
Yeah, both my parents. It's very important in significant ways. Both my parents are from Puerto Rico. Let me backtrack a little that way. And they were a couple that they moved from the countryside to San Juan, which the differences at that time in the late 50s, early 60s were huge from what was happening in San Juan and the small towns. And my mom is from a coffee town called Yauco, and best known for being the town that produced the coffee that the Pope used to drink at the time. And my dad was from Isabela, in the northern part of the island, northwest part of the island. Very different ethnic composition also in that part. He's a Mediterranean-looking, tall, 6'2". She was Indian-looking, kind of like more Latina, typical Latina-looking, and from a different part of the island. So they came in at a moment in which it was all about growth and development in Puerto Rico. That was a time in which we have moved from a country that was at the beginning of the century one of the poorest, if not the poorest in Latin America, to one in which there have been a great deal of transformation, economic opportunities and educational opportunities. And my father was kind of like a living example of that. When he was in 8th grade, the way he described it is that they live in poverty, they're very decent and very well kept and tight family. And he went from 8th grade, not having enough shoes to go to events or school, to 5 years later being on a scholarship at Berkeley University in California, and not knowing English and not knowing anything. And in fact, as he told me at one point, the language requirement for the doctoral program was German. He became a political scientist, my dad, which is an important piece of what then became who I am. So I have this social worker on the one hand, and this political scientist on the other. So from her, as I said to you, she was one way to describe her, she was like a Puerto Rican flower girl. She was like a hippie type. She would take me to the grass at night and kind of like lay on the grass and look at the stars. And she was really free. She was like a free spirit in such an incredible way, in a genuine way. She later on became also a hand healer. Not because she studied, but because she would go to all these trainings and things. And then when she met some of the other healers, they said, do you know that you have an enormous amount of energy, that your hands are so warm? And so she could remove your headaches and things. She could put her hand on your forehead, on your back. And so I'm growing on the one hand with the world of compassion possibilities with her that was not bounded by the stereotypical ways of thinking. And then by my dad, who was probably one of the smartest persons I have ever met. I mean, it was all about rigor and imagination, and he was a consultant to politicians, and he was kind of like a assistant to governors. And so with her, I had access to the people in the ground that were having difficulty in Puerto Rico. She would take me to the shanty towns where the police, for example, would not even go because they were such forbidden neighborhoods. But she would be the queen of that neighborhood. Wow. When she walked in there, people would respond to her. She would not negate a hug to anybody or a kiss to anybody. That was actually her way of, she would come in and the first thing, she would kiss you, she would grab you by the cheeks. How are you doing? They call it Ada, and the people who knew her as a child call her Viñita. So I grew up seeing that. I grew up seeing her concern about the well-being of some of the people she was serving. That she did a lot of drug abuse-related work at that time and drug addiction. And I remember her concern, but not depressed. She was, I mean, there was somebody to go and look for, and because they haven't seen it, and she would go and find it, and then get the help the person needed, and they would go home to cook food. They wasn't really, she didn't seem to be down by it. That was just, she was proud of what she was doing and doing the work that needed to be done. On the other hand, I could tell you at home, the governor and members of the cabinet at the time, they would come play domino on weekends. And I would be the one serving the rum and coke for them. And I was allowed a place at the table. So I could really, I mean, I was quiet. They knew I was a well-behaved kid. You know me. I'm always kind of like so I was like, but they knew I was listening. I was there. I was really, the conversations they had, you could imagine. These were people who were in charge of the island. And I was the paper boy of my neighborhood. So they would play on a Friday, and I would hear, and then what they talked about would come out on the Sunday paper. So to me, there was no line between the access to power and the ability that they had to affect change. It was so real. Like I could see it. They were talking about this, and then conversations that happened there had seemed to me to be transpired. It's almost like a carbon copy will come out on the paper, of what happens. I see somebody was listening to
over
this.
dominoes.
It's over dominoes, and a lot of rum, so I mentioned this because it's almost like a metaphor of this incredibly rich and interesting kind of like a set of possibilities that were presented to me from the beginning. There is a world that is unfair. There's a lot of people that are suffering, that are really, really hurt, and you cannot just sit in your house and wait that things happen for their life to get better. You got to move. You got to reach out. You got to hug them. You had to kiss them. So that was very clear. And then on his side, I never, by the way, my dad wasn't the kissing type, as you can imagine, or the one that was but more consistent with the stereotypical views of what men, Latino men ought to be. He wasn't necessarily that kind of a person at that stage in his life. He evolved. But from him, you saw this incredible confidence that things could be figured out. That if you applied rigor, kind of an imagination, and then access to convey that information to those in power, that you can move the needle, that things could change. So I when I came to the United States, I came with that confidence that I didn't know what I was going to do. I thought I was going to get ready, become a lawyer, and go back to help the island. That's what if you look at my yearbook and talk to my friends from high school, that's what they all thought I would do. Because it was later on here through other set of experiences that I'll tell you later. Now, the third piece that I think, and I thought about this in preparation to the talk with you today, that it was, again, a fortunate set of experiences for me, had to do with my older sister. And my sister, what I learned about her, about determination and courage from her, is the kind of stuff that you don't learn to articulate ever until much later in your life, if ever. I remember she is from a very young age. She was actually one of the most prolific and distinguished athletes in Puerto Rico. She was in the national basketball team. She was selected as the best basketball player on more than one occasion. She was selected the top basketball player in North America in a tournament. She was also in the national volleyball team. She was an All-American in the U.S. playing for the University of Las Vegas, Nevada. Anyhow, those are the accomplishments. What the story behind the story was that she was also a lesbian at a time when she didn't know she was a lesbian. I didn't know she was a lesbian. But guess what? I was the main person for her. I was her companion. I was her chaperone. So I saw her struggling with something, and I could hear also what other people were saying. And it was incredible over the years how whatever she set out to do, she would do. She was, and mind you, that she didn't have the verbal skills or the math skills or the academic skills or the rest of the family, in a sense. She just had guts. She was fearless, and determination, and always saw the glass half full. It was really amazing to me. I remember she was 12 years old, and they were building the big Coliseum in Puerto Rico. Roberto Clemente, the next level athletes are going to go, professional players. And we were walking to an event there. It was just built. And I remember her pointing up and said, I am going to be playing there very soon, very soon. A year had gone by, and she was center stage in the court there, shooting, because the bigger the crowd, the better she was. It was a ridiculous thing. I couldn't believe it. And she became, if not the first one, one of the first female athletes in Puerto Rican history to receive a full scholarship, athletic scholarship in the U.S. But because of all these other issues, she crashed, because of the identity stuff, because the lack of support for who she was and all this, and turning to the alcohol. And she recently celebrated, I believe, it's 35, 40 years of sobriety. So she approached that with the same determination, the same courage. So, it's one of those things. I think when I think about that combination, they all live in me every day, because it is about care, compassion, courage, determination, rigor, and imagination. It's kind of like those are things that I almost like guiding values in my life, and I think they're very, very much tied to my experiences with them. And then experiences that I had in the U.S. and opportunities that I had in the U.S. for which I'm very, very grateful. Mentors that I had, and as soon as I got in, who recognized, this kid, there's something in this kid. We can work with him. He's some did it in ways that I would not have expected. There was a distinguished professor of psychology who told me one day, he said, listen, I don't mean to be offensive I don't know how to best say this. You don't act Puerto Rican. And I was like, I didn't know that much English when I came in, so I was like trying to figure out what he meant. I knew that because the type of person that he was, that he didn't really want to be offensive, to me. But at the same time, I was thinking, wow, that's bold. And I asked him, say, what is it that you think I should be doing? And he looked at me and said, I'm really ashamed. I just don't know. You respond so well to all these high-level academic environments and everything. And I explained, well, let me tell you, my father is a political scientist. He's a professor at the University of Puerto. I mean, he had not taken, he had assumed all the development. He was thinking of the West Side Story and not of the, and so anyhow, but even him gave me extraordinary experiences. I mean, he was one of the people who also said, I think you need to go further. I mean, this is that you have to stay in the field. And then in grad school, I had other teachers who saw the same thing. I was never happy with the field of psychology. When you come from a colony like Puerto Rico and you grew up in a colony, a couple of things happen. One is that you learn to mistrust the official word. Somebody's benefiting from what is being said. And I had happened to have seen it also over the domino. I could see, how the connection to the official word. So you had the skepticism that helped the skepticism I brought into here, which I thought was almost absent from the field of psychology. In fact, these people really think that people suffer because this thing, and they're basing this on rat research, or whatever it was. And and in my mind, I mean, I didn't have enough pedigree to question them.
Right.
I did go on to the point in which I wrote a book on advancing social justice through clinical practice, which was where I was finally telling to the field, listen, you can pretend that all these toxic conditions that are really all around us are not there, but you do that at your own peril and risking the health of the people that you're really trying to assist. So if you do therapy without any of the ism, without attending to racism, without attending to classism, without attending to issues of sexism, without attending to issues of ableism, if you don't pay attention to those, la toxicidad in our social, relational, and community world, if you don't recognize that directly, then you are tying your hands to your back. You're really limiting so much what you can do. It's not that recognizing detrimental effects of those factors does not make you necessarily more effective in what you're doing, but it really at least gives you options and it helps you understand when to give up or not. Anyhow.
Yeah, I just want to just take a moment just to acknowledge once again your familia, your mom, your dad, your sister, and many other people where you grew up, and the direct and the indirect teachings that you've come to realize have had a great impact on who you are and how you do things in life. And I'll tell you, when I met you, and heard you speak in such an articulate way, me daba mucho orgullo, to see this brown man that was very gentle, very somewhat soft-spoken, but with such confidence, speaking truth, to the world and challenging what, had been written for so many years about what trauma was, the cause of trauma, the cause of violence, the cause of mental health issues, and you were challenging those things. But you were challenging in such a gentle way, but with such profound confidence, And not till right now did I recognize where that came from.
I see.
Till you mentioned your mom and her journey, and your dad and his brilliance, and your sister and her perseverance, and all the other little experiences, including dominoes, of when decisions are made and then you get this choice, So I want to acknowledge those relatives of yours. As we acknowledge you, I want to acknowledge them. And if they're an ancestor, then they're going to hear it too. I just want to acknowledge them and thank them because, the work that you've done for so many years and are doing now still has helped so many people and caused so many other people behind you to have the courage to speak truth and to challenge. And as you were speaking, I'm thinking, that book that you wrote a long time ago needs to be read right now, because people are dismissing the aspect of culture and values and the toxicity of the environment and how that really plays in it. And even the comment that your professor made, wondering where that brilliance came from this Puerto Rican boy. We hear that now. We hear, the opposite of that, we don't have brilliance. We don't have, planes crash because of diversity. It's crazy, the misnomers and the real hate that's come across, So I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that, because I would imagine, and I know, you speak to those people that supported you, but I'm sure there was some challenges in your journey of you getting through school and then getting your PhD, writing, and then doing the work that you do. Can you talk a little about those challenges and how you got through them?
I'll promise that I'll get to that, but you just reminded me of honoring a couple of more people from my life that first, a lot of the way in the characterization about my mom, I think, fits very well her whole family. And my whole, my grandfather, my mom's side, my uncles and my grandma, the way that you were describing me, I think I would describe them. They were gentle people who were, they still are, they have a soft way about them and a critical attitude. to things without necessarily picking a fight with you. They just simply. So I just want to acknowledge that, and then reminding me also of my grandfather on my father's side, who died at the age of 99, 100. He was self-educated,
Wow.
and he learned, presumably learned to read by reading the dictionary. He would learn words from the dictionary every day, and taught himself to read. When I finished my undergrad education at Temple University, Philadelphia, I was fortunate enough to receive all sorts of recognitions, academic achievement recognitions. The most important being, I was chosen by the faculty and students in the psychology department as the student most likely to succeed in their whatever the next pursuit was. And I was like my ego was appropriately inflated, by all these things. I was feeling good. I was like, whoa, I came and I really took over, and I showed them and myself we can do it. I was so proud, and my whole family was proud. So my grandfather called me up to go to the town. He was living still in the town, a couple of hours away from San Juan. And my dad said, he wants you to be there by yourself. I thought, oh. So in my mind, I thought, he's going to give me a check. He's going to, I honestly, because he wasn't really a man that talked a lot. I mean, the family was very close. It's a very patriarchal family, very close around his figure. He was a centerpiece of, there were 11 uncles and aunts, 35 cousins, and I don't know, it's a big thing. So I go there to meet with him, and I'm with him, and, we have spent the morning, and then I'm like, nothing is happening. No money's coming the way it is. and then in the afternoon, he's blind. He's sitting with me, and he has a whole bunch of little dogs, Chihuahua dogs around him, and chickens around, and he lived in a farm. And he said, "You know why I call you?" And he said, "Yeah, I imagine it had to do with the, what I did in the U.S. and in school." And he said, "Maybe." He said, "But I'm calling you here to remind you that what you've done is not extraordinary. It was what expected. You did what we expected of you." He said,
wow.
And you have to keep in mind that all of your uncles, everybody in this family, and aunts are public servants. So you have a gift, and you have to use it. Figure a way how to use it. That was it. That was the conversation. He didn't elaborate, and I was done. And no check. I was like, oh my gosh. So, and I was really, it was really profound for me, and I went back. My dad is asking, so what happened? And he said, I don't know. I have to think about it before I tell you. And so I shared with him. He said, yeah, I know. He told me before that that's how he felt, and he's worried that the success of his great grandchildren is going to get to their heads, and they're not going to really, they're going to lose their way. And because you all have opportunities that none of us had.
Wow.
Anyhow, so that's another person, another experience, another set of values. Now, so in terms of challenges, from the get-go, the biggest challenge I had was that I had resisted learning English. For me, having a D or an F in English all through my middle school and high school was an act of resistance. So I would give my grades to my dad. He would look and would see A's on the other things, D or F in English, and he said, good, he'll sign it. And then he will say to me, whenever you want to learn English, you will. And you know why? He would say to me, because you know your language, your native language well. You're excellent in Spanish. When you decide you want to learn English, you're going to do okay. So I applied to the U.S. not knowing English. It was really a crazy thing. And in fact, all my early classes were with non-English speakers. I was there, and there was so much language interference on my writing. One of the first essays that I wrote in college, I passed the English for second language speakers, non-native English courses, and then I moved to the regular course, and I get this creative writer instructor, which I remember his name because he went on to win awards. So he's a great writer. So he gives this assignment. I prepare an essay, send it back to him. I get an F. I get 3 Fs in a row in the first 3 essays. And then I says, come over, I need to talk to you. And then he says, I think you need to drop the class. And I didn't know exactly, I honestly didn't know exactly what that meant. Just, what do you mean drop? No, you have to get out of the class. And then where would I go? And he's like, no, you have to unregister, get out of this class, because you're going to get an F from this class. And this is not. And I said, listen, professor, I said, do you know where I come from? It's 3,000 miles away. I didn't come here to drop from my class. If you think, because he has said to me, I like how you think. That's why I remember he said, I really like your ideas, but you have so much language interference that it is really very difficult for me to give you the feedback you need. And I said, if you like how I think and you're willing to work with me, then I'll put the time to make the changes that you think I need to make. And he looked at me. I remember him looking at me like, you got to be kidding me. And then he said, the only time I can do it is in the morning, like at 7 before I go to other thing. In the morning, 7 o'clock in the morning, as a freshman. And I said, okay, I'm here. So we would meet every day from Monday to Thursday at 7 o'clock.
Wow.
We had to hand in, Tuesday, I think, they would, for the next week, hand in an essay. I would get time to prepare it. He would give me quick feedback. I would do the edits again and hand it in on the appropriate day with the rest of the class. I was ahead of everybody. And then my grades began to move from F to C to B. So I was in that. So, and the final comes up, and I was so desperate to go back to Puerto Rico and the break. I booked the plane month in advance, not knowing anything about how to coordinate the final exams. It was like, it interfered with the time of my flight. So I'm taking the exam, and I have another hour on the exam, but you needed to complete 3 essays, and I completed 2. You need to pass 2 or 3 essays to pass the class, the exam. And I gave it to him. There were only 2 of them, 2 essays. And he looked at me, opened his eyes, said, Etiony, you are missing one. He said, no, I did exactly what you taught me. It's right there. Those are really good. And I went away. I went. And 2 weeks later, we get a letter. Well, you had to leave an envelope. And those are the days before email, So you left the envelope so they could tell you a grade and so on. And he wrote me, then the regular thing, this is the note, but then he wrote a letter to my parents, basically saying how this experience had transformed his way of teaching. He said, this is, and I said, I don't know how you did it or what happened, but I'm a different teacher today because Etiony made me come every day at 7 o'clock. But anyhow, so that was a challenge that again, I didn't doubt for a moment that I would get it. I just needed the right instruction. There were others, dealing with discrimination and the ways in which Latinos are marginalized and discriminated in academia as you move forward change in more subtle ways once you reach the higher you go. So, and this is not news to anybody, but I remember going to a very important meeting with a very important group of researchers who became important in my life, but it was about making decisions for postdoctoral work and so on, and a network of researchers that were at the top on the field. And I had great ideas I wanted to explore and so on. And all they wanted to talk was about statistics. And I honestly, I had been an undergrad TA on statistics. I kind of it wasn't like I was timid about it, but I didn't understand where that came from. So in talking to the person who was my mentor in grad school, he was livid when I told him what had happened. And I said, why are you so upset? That was the one who was being quizzed. He said, no, it's because they could not believe that a brown-skinned Latino boy like you, they were looking for what was the area that you were weak. They were looking and they assumed maybe the math is where we would get him. Maybe the math is and I was like, what? Yeah, this is what it is. They feel more comfortable talking about the areas that are strong. They didn't talk about any of the areas that you were strong because they knew that you would take them. That's anyhow. So I remember that conversation being like, wow.
So how did all of this work then lead you to addressing the issue of domestic violence and issue of men
Yeah.
and that whole aspect of violence?
So when domestic violence came into my life as an academic topic, was the moment in which I was reading a lot of things. I was living in Western Mass, a lot of awareness of inequalities and gender issues. And the Pioneer Valley is the discourse there is much more progressive than in many other parts of the country, especially at that time. So I have been reading. They didn't call it domestic violence back then. They actually didn't have a term yet. In the field, they call it conjoint violence. But I was also doing clinical work in the family centers of the Birchers in Pittsfield as a practicum student. And I began to ask every family that came in on my own. I just, when you are angry, when you're in this conflict, when you're doing this, have you ever hit each other? Have you ever done? I began to just do my thing. I was really a devoted researcher, first of all. So to my surprise, the majority of these folks said yes. But at the same time, and this is what I remember learning that phrase, one of them said to me, but it's water under the bridge. And I thought, water under the bridge, what do you mean? Yeah, it's not really something that we talk about. And I remember questioning that person that said, it's hard for me to believe that it's water under the bridge. But I said, I take your word so I went to the literature to learn about the impact of violence on relationships that continued, and then realized that this population didn't exist in the literature. So that became, that really became an interesting issue for me, because I thought, how is it that it just, 6 or 7 of every 10 couples that I asked said yes, and the research said that they don't exist? So I said, probably has to do with how we're selecting people to be in the studies. And honestly, for me, that was kind of like the brightest thing I ever done in my life. I went in and reviewed the criteria for selection and exclusion and all, 200, 300 studies have been done at the time on men who batter and relationship violence. And sure enough, again and again, the research would exclude couples, respondents who reported violence in the past, but not in the present. So they have selected them out. And I said, no wonder, that's what it is. And based on that, I said, I made an estimate that approximately, I think it was 40% of the people who were involved in this violent relationship really did not experience violence over the next year or two. And that is exactly what I found out in the research when I went in. And now I mentioned this, that's my involvement as an academic, because in the process, there are things that we choose not to emphasize too much in our lives, but in the process, it became very clear, in part through relationship with people like you and folks in the Alianza, and the threading of personal healing and relational and community with our choices, what we were doing, that in fact, I had been witness at home I saw my dad, the person that I loved the most and that I respect the most, lifting up my mom in full weight and throwing it against the wall. So I remember seeing that and seeing my sister, who was the only one who had the courage and determination, standing up and saying to him, no way, this stops now.
Wow.
And all that happened, by the way, in my bedroom. I remember this I remember. So it was one of those things that it was an experience that I put to the side, in part because it was inconsistent with anything else of the world that I had created for myself in relationship to them. But also, once I got the research to support the evidence that men could change, that the perpetrators could move on to life worth living without violence, then he became kind of like a case study for me. And he became one of my main supporters. He wouldn't talk about it until years later. Years later, he did talk to me, it's like, by which I knew the things that you now talk about back then. And he felt always that he may have kind of like damaged me and others. And I said, now it turned out that you gave me a whole line of research that has benefited the world.
Well, but in you saying that, there's something really profound that just hit me. And it's, when you were able to consider that men can heal, then it opened up an avenue by which you were willing to explore not only the area, but explore how had impacted your life. And that very same thing, is what I find in the men that I've worked with over the last 40 years, is when you categorize them as a perpetrator, as a batterer, they resist. No, 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 no. But when you begin to say, I think we can make your life better. I think you can release those wounds and you can become someone that you really want to become. You can return to the sacredness. You can return to that hombre noble that maybe you gave up at 4. There's something that then happens that opens you up in a consideration of wanting to heal and wanting to transform, And I think that's the work that many of us have done for many, many years. And it's the work that, you're doing right now at the Melissa Institute. I mean, whole array of work that you're doing around healing, around advocacy, around prevention. Can you talk about your present work? Because it's definitely profound and one of the few institutions that's doing the level of work that you're doing.
Thank you for the opportunity to say a little bit about that. And I'm fortunate to be in this job, and to have the support of directors and the founders of the organization. And the Melissa Institute started way before I got here. We're going into our 30th year. I've been the director since 2018. And all I did was just take a lot of what they had done and try to scale it up, and bring my national network of friends and others, their work to be relevant for what we do. So I'm very grateful for that. We're curators of the best knowledge available, research-based, and kind of like interventions and strategies to prevent violence and heal its victims. That's what we do. We try to find out, do we know enough about this? Do we know it? Can we have confidence in this knowledge? Is it generated in a way that will be helpful to others? And then we try to make it digestible to others. One area in which we have increasingly found that there was a fertile ground for everyone to learn and to embrace their role in this has been through what we call trauma-informed care and resilience practices. So we have created, for example, now a network, the Trauma-Informed Care and Resilience Network in Miami-Dade County, where we have created a curriculum that we give out for free to anybody in the world that wants it. But not only do we give it for free, but if you want to be part of the network, then we also can have you be part of train the trainer sessions, so that you can then also do some of this training and we can collaborate with you, providing technical assistance if necessary. Because now the goal of this network is to prepare every provider of services, of social services, medical services, any service, legal services, to youth and adults, who may have had traumatic experiences, to give them the basic tools so that they would recognize the signs, of trauma, behaving ways and acting ways and make decisions that are really consistent with the limitations perhaps of the person that they're working with at the moment, and facilitate the healing process by not re-traumatizing them and by being able to have access to other resources that may be available for them. There's so much stuff right now there. There's so much trauma that most of us cannot handle this. It's too much to bear for anybody to even acknowledge this. How difficult it is life for so many people. And people often feel that they have to take care of all of it in order to assist one person. They suffer from what I call the social justice blues. They think that if I go in that direction, then it's my problem to deal with all the limitations, difficulties, stressors in this person's life, when in fact, that's not really a good recipe for life. That's what they need to do is understand what are the needs, what are the challenges, what is the possible impact of the trauma in this person's development and abilities to engage with others, to develop quality relationships, to make decisions that are about what is about life and how is life worth living, that are consistent with those ideas. To really know that and to understand that there are limitations as to what you can do, but that you can really then help them. You can help them understand who's at the table and what resources they may have to assist them if they need for that. The response so far, I could tell you, has been amazing. We had over 40. We started last spring, and quickly got over 40 agencies that said, "Hey, I want this." Then we trained dozens of agencies through the year in this. And I think it's an easy model that doesn't require much funding for people to have. And then my job, because I do have access to the scientific advisors, the Melissa Institute core group is that what makes us special is that we have a scientific advisory board of experts in violence prevention who are interested and willing to give out their knowledge for free to us and to the world. I tell people, they call in and we seem to have answers to everything that people ask for. And I said, it's not artificial intelligence. I have real intelligence behind there. People who are doing this work, who really are happy to. And then I thought they all are very willing, and it's been moving in recent years. Prominent scholars reaching out. During the pandemic, we had several prominent violence prevention scholars reach out and said, "Listen, we're looking what's happening. Yeah, APA is not doing much. This is not happening. You guys seem to be it. And I said, "Can I be part of this?" I said, "Yeah, come in." So we did that and grew, and since the pandemic, by the way, we had kind of had a representative or users, if you will, of our materials and trainings from 138 countries around the world.
Wow.
And so it's really been
it's amazing.
The impact in that way has been amazing. So that's one of the things that we do. We also have a very exciting initiative that I think is going to be as an impact at the national level. It's a social media safety and mental health initiative that includes a program that is evidence-based now and in partnership with researchers from the University of Glasgow. It's called Project Real. And it teaches youth how to detect fake news in social media. So we're working on Project Real USA. We're kind of like adapting and evolving the materials to do that. And our next conference now on May 2nd, which again is a free conference where people can get continuing education credit for any profession that you are. And it will be shown virtually. Our next conference is on that, on social media and mental health, and kind of like data-driven strategies for parents, teachers, educators, and others who care about this issue. Wow. So I think that program, that when it gets really going, is going to be, because and the program works. I mean, the beauty of it is that it works. Yeah. It's simple. The kids are just amazing. When you give them the stuff, they're so way ahead. And the program was developed with the help of influencers working in collaboration with youth. So it's a youth-driven program, and you can Google it too. You can go and get the information on Project Real at the UK, and you can directly access, or you can go to our website, www.melissainstitute.org. We also have the materials there. And it's phenomenal. A young researcher that I think is going to have a great impact in the world, Yvonne Skipper.
Wow. That seems like an amazing, I mean, I definitely want to explore that more. And I think, for a lot of the listeners, I just encourage you to check that out, because I think, right now, trying to distinguish what is real and what is fake is half the half the battle right there, just trying to, as we close today, I want to come back to where we started, the experience of your family there in Puerto Rico and where you lived, and have you reflect a little bit, as an elder, because, whether you want to or not, you've been around a little bit of time
62.
And have a little bit of experience here, and I'd like to just invite you to share, especially for those next generation leaders, and especially for our people of color that are trying to balance out that corazón, their spirit of their people and their legacy, and especially right now in this difficult time with the challenges. What consejos would you give them? What's kind of advice in terms of, living life in a good way, not forgetting who you are? I mean, What would you tell people that you wish someone, or maybe not you wish somebody, I guess somebody did tell you. You had people that shared certain teachings with you. What would you like to remind people of that could help them navigate through, especially through these tough times that we're in?
So I, especially in these times, I think there are a couple of things that I think people should not be too hard on themselves about. One is
Mm.
a lot of people you hear expressing dismay because it's too much to take. Like they cannot make sense of all of the things, the bombardment of information and misinformation. And they're right. They should not really worry too much about that because it's just that has been done by design because it exceeds our brain's abilities to make sense of this. So this is not really, it's not new. It's not a new strategy. But it's important that you don't take it personal as if you are unable to make sense of what's happening. When you declare yourself unable to make sense of what's happening, sometimes one option is inactivity. I'll wait and kind of like, which rarely leads to happiness, because if you think unhappiness really is a block action when you don't get to do the things that you want. Is so
Right.
so it's a recommendation that I do have for people is that consistent with the teachings that you get, the teachings of kind of like folks who do meditation work, who do breath work, and who do other. It's to really to live with intention, with the discipline, to have an intention to this is the kind of day I want to have. This is the kind of relationships I want to have. It doesn't matter what. You can continue to do that and to treat people the way they know they deserve to be treated. And you will have the impact that you want to have in the world and in your own life. If you come to the point in which you appreciate that you're doing it with intentionality, this is what you set out to do. Because some of us, the issue is if it becomes a reaction or an act of improvisation, then a lot of people get by. I mean, jazz players can improvise, they can do this, that's okay. But I think this is not a moment to improvise too much. This is a moment to kind of like decide what is within the range of possibilities for me in terms of the kind of life that I want to live for myself, for my children, for my grandchildren and others. And what can I do today to do that? What can I do tomorrow? And really to revise that again and again. We have to pay attention. We have to consume the information with a healthy skepticism, that we need to make skepticism work for us. And kind of like it's okay to be skeptical about things. And it's okay to know that you don't have the solutions for this because nobody's asking us to have the solutions. This is okay.
Right.
But, if your coworker is expressing some needs and there are some gaps in terms of support and things that they need, you can do something about that. If your child, requires special attention and consideration because they're very anxious about what's going on right now and they worry about the job and the cost of things and who's going to pay this, then maybe there's a moment to sit down and have them work with you on the budget for the house and say, listen, this is how much it costs. When it gets to this point, we might have to worry, but not now. I don't know. It's not really earth-shaking advice, but I think more. I think it's to stay within what is within the realm of possibility and strength that you have and commitments that you have to re-honor kind of like those commitments, rekindle those commitments, if anything. And that's a good way. It's kind of like to remember what we know to be the case and to be good about. You use the word being a hombre noble, no? That doesn't change because our leaders are acting in different ways. That doesn't change because the discourse that is promoted seems to be so offensive, You still can be hombre noble in that context. And it's an antidote for that, Usually it's an antidote. I don't know. It's an exercise that I don't recommend to anybody. But if you repeat some of the things that you hear some of our leaders now say, and you say them out, I feel that they kind of like erode me from inside. They kind of like I have to get to a point to be able to say that is really literally beneath me. It's literally como corrupto, no? Una manera, it's painful. So we don't have to do that. We can choose not to. We can choose to be as good as we think we can be, and to honor our elders and to honor the ways of knowing that we know have worked before. And when I think about, I told you about my dad, about the poverty of the family, about nothing in comparison to what we have right now. So I worry about the brain development issues related to the use of the technology, and the evidence is beginning to come out on that, and hopefully we'll address more of that at the conference. We're trying to get some experts to talk about that, and those things are very serious because we need to make sure that we protect our youth and generations from really going that path. And I see it, their inability sometimes to use all the rich dimensions of interactions, to take them all into consideration before they react or before they respond.
Yes.
Because if they're not looking at your eyes, if they're not really, if they're swiping and looking down, the world is literally moving. The things that you need to see moving, you're not seeing moving. So,
and I think you said some very significant things that I want to just reemphasize. And one of them that comes through is know who you are. If you're un hombre noble, if you're this person, if you come from this familia, if these are the valores, remember that. Live with that intention. You know that. Know what you know who you are, and live that way. And then I think, I remember my abuelita, she didn't speak any English. She didn't know a lot about this country or nothing like that. But tenía sus modos. She had her tradiciones. She would pray every morning at 4 o'clock. She would go to church. She would do what she knew. And sometimes we'd come home upset. No. She would shoot. Todo va a estar bien, mijo. I was like, well, how do you know it's going to be that? Todo va a estar bien. I mean, she had a faith about her. But I think the other thing that you mentioned, especially with social media and everything, is we need to decide what we expose ourselves to. My mom would say, dime con qué andas, diré quién eres, right? So tell me who you hang out with. But it's not just who you hang out with. It's what you expose yourself to. And so what is it we're exposing ourselves to? And you mentioned the kind of music that you listen to. The kind of vibrations that you're around, the people that you're around, all of those things influence you, And, as we close today, I just want to say to you that your vibration, your energy, your music, your intellect has made my life better. Me being around you, me being a friend of yours and doing work together with you has enhanced my life, but it enhanced so many more people's lives. And I want to thank you for that, because I know it hasn't always been easy, and it's not easy, even in the position that you're in now. But Etiony, I want to thank you, dar las gracias a usted and a su familia and all of your elders and all those people that have come before, that have put you in a place, that have, encouraged you to do this work that has helped so many, many people. And for some of us that weren't the intellectual researchers and didn't have the evidence-based practice, you gave us a way to validate what we were doing, that we knew in our spirit and we did it. But you gave us an avenue by which we can then know that what we were doing was valid, it was worthwhile, and it was important. And I appreciate you for that journey and for everything that you've done. I appreciate you so much, and thank you so much for coming on with us. Any last words to the audience?
I just want to also thank you and remind you of one particular incident that I think in our interactions that I think shaped me, my course in the field and in the U.S. forever. In the very first meeting of the National Latino Alliance, when I was invited to be in the steering committee, 5 minutes had gone by and people had really said a lot of intense things, or 10 minutes, and I went to talk, and you put your hand on my shoulder and you said, just listen, listen. Your time will come. Just listen now. I was new in the group, and I remember, mainly women in the group, if you remember at the time.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay. So 2 days went by. This is when we had the weekend meetings. And at the end of the last day on Sunday, You turned to me and said, okay, Etiony, do you have anything to say? I was listening to it there for a day and a half. I was like, yeah. And I started, and you and Ricardo turned around and said, I told you he was listening. I told you. Anyhow, no, I think it was because I thank you and elders and others with more experience than I had at the time and even today for giving me confidence and in different ways to getting it done and different ways of knowing and in understanding that, yeah, I was very good. I am very good, but I was very good in a particular way of doing things. But it would be immensely arrogant of my part to just insist to do things only that way. So I think in by seeing you, by seeing Ricardo, by seeing others, and I thought, you know what? There are other ways here that get to a lot of people in a much better way. The needle is being moved in many. That's what we need, to move the needle all at the same time in different ways. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And, as the listeners, as we're closing out today, let's carry that lesson. It's important for us to listen, not only listen with our heads, but listen with our hearts and listen to our spirits. But I want to challenge you first to listen to your ancestors and listen to the teachings of your elders and listen to the messages that have come through you in growing up. Before you turn on the news or before you check that social media, first do that internal listening. And then you can listen to everything else. And then what fits in terms of who you are and your intention of who you want to become or who you people have really wanted you to become and your own sense of this is who you want to be. That will help us as we move through, as we feed our faith more than our fear, and that we can then move in a way in which we fulfill our grandmothers, mothers, grandfathers' wishes para servir la gente, to serve people, We thank you for listening. Invite people to share this podcast with others. Give us feedback. I want to encourage you to look up the Melissa Institute and all the work that Etiony is doing there, along with other colleagues, and take advantage of the many things that they're offering, many things that they're offering that can really enhance. Thank you all very much, and may you have a blessed day.
For more information about Healing Generations and the Healing Generations Institute, visit nationalcompadresnetwork.org and be sure to subscribe to stay up to date with our new releases.